About 12 years ago, I had been invited by a work colleague to give a presentation to his wife's Grow Club. Now, what a Grow Club is, or at least in that period of time what it was a group of families. There was about 12 of them that all picked between 3 and 5 different vegetables or fruits that they would then grow in their yards and do so in an amount and a quantity to be able to provide for the other 12 families. So basically, you can imagine if each family grew 3 varieties, then what they would end up would be 36 different fruits and vegetables that they would receive from this Grow Club. So a colleague of mine was kind of responsible for booking talent, if you will, for his wife's Grow Club, and he asked me if I could give a talk. I was flattered. I'd never really had any desire to speak to a Grow Club, and I really wasn't a professional speaker or anything. So I told Casey, yeah, I'd do the talk. So the talk that I gave was titled, and is, I guess, the talk that what I'm recording now, is the 5 things that I didn't know that I did not know. Now, since the time of giving this talk, there are many other things that I didn't know that I did not know, but this was the first 5 that I ever spoke about. So the first thing that I didn't know that I did not know was that hunger has no allies. You see, hunger doesn't care about your political inclination. It doesn't care about your ethnicity. It doesn't care about your country of origin. It doesn't care about your gender. It doesn't care about your sexual preference. Hunger doesn't have any allies, except possibly maybe, famine and death. And I first realized that I didn't know this when I was a United States Marine. And I had been deployed to the Asia-Pacific region, and it was there that I discovered this. I saw people that were starving, bone-thin, emaciated, starving people that barely had any existence. And the reason I didn't know this is, I grew up, maybe not in the wealthiest family, and certainly not in a wealthy family, but we didn't grow up, below the boulders poor. We had food, we had water, we had shelter. We had a pretty decent existence as a kid anyways. I mean, places to play and all sorts of trouble to get into. Before I graduated, I never actually graduated from high school, I went to the United States Marine Corps right around my 17th birthday. And it was there that I had no need to worry about hunger. I mean, certainly there was times we were deployed and things like that maybe food wasn't in the strictest abundance, but we had food, and it was edible, and it was available. And it wasn't really until after the Marine Corps, there was a couple of places that I went traveling to, that I discovered that there are some very hungry people that have a very low quality of life because they cannot get the food that they need. And so the first thing that I didn't know, that I did not know, was that hunger has no allies. It didn't care if it was a white kid, a black kid, a green kid, a purple kid, or adults, or women, or men, tall or short. It certainly it just didn't care. The second thing that I didn't know, that I did not know, was that growing food is actually quite easy. It's really not that complex. I'd always thought there was some mythical process, and if you read gardening books and you look at agricultural books, and you got to have this kind of soil with this type of pH balance, and they prefer this and they prefer that, and it can be very daunting. The truth of the matter is, the first time I decided to grow something was because I couldn't find a certain kind of things that I like to eat, which they were peppers. I was looking for some good cayenne pepper, some good jalapeno pepper, things that I kind of grew up eating and enjoying when growing up in Colorado. I was out in the eastern part of the United States, and I just didn't find the stuff that I wanted. So back then, I used a seed catalog. This is before this wonderful tool of the internet is available, and there's so many options. And I ordered 7 different types of peppers that I enjoy eating: banana peppers, some chocolate bells, jalapenos, cayenne, etc. And the house that I was living in out in the backyard had this big terracotta pot that the previous owner had left. And I went to the garden store and I got some gardening soil and I filled that terracotta pot up and I put 7 different peppers inside of that pot. Now, I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to plant that many. And I'm sure it's very much like the kid riding a bicycle atop a wooden fence. Doesn't know that he's not supposed to be able to do that until somebody tells him he's not supposed to be able to do that. And then the kid falls, or so the old adage goes. Well, I was a little disheartened. I watched that soil every single day, multiple times a day, just to see if those peppers had popped up. And they hadn't. And I was getting a little bit heartbroken. What I didn't realize is that pepper seeds take between 7 and 14 days to germinate. I know that now. I didn't know that then. And I remember I was having a cup of coffee on my back porch, right near my obsession, which was this terracotta pot filled with dirt, and lo and behold, I had sprouts overnight. I had looked at them before I called it a night the evening before, and the next day I had 6 or 7 little sproutlings, and I was floored, man. I was leveled. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I was celebrating. I thought, wow, yeah, this is awesome. I didn't have a gardening book. I didn't have any soil amendments or rock dust or crab shells or sea salts or any of these amendments that everyone's adding. I didn't even have compost. I had some basic potting soil. And I tended to those plants adoringly for a long time. And then later, I realized that I had honestly, overplanted that planter, and I thinned it out and carefully transplanted into another, pot. And I enjoyed those peppers the entire season. It was awesome. I couldn't believe it. I was so proud of myself. I had a relationship with that food that I had grown. It wasn't as scientific, requiring my knowledge of how much pH needs to be in the soil and how much calcium and this, that, and the other, right? And in fact, what's interesting is I didn't have any end rot, any of that stuff. It didn't exist to me. So that was basically the second thing that I didn't know that I did not know, was that growing is actually quite easy, especially when you're growing food that you really like. That's a really great point. The third thing that I didn't know that I did not know was that other people share similar interests. So it was about the same time that I had heard a guy on a late night FM talk show talking about something called aquaponics. And aquaponics is taking all of the inputs that fish and aquatic life need, like food, sun, and water, and taking their outputs from that aquatic life and then sending it down the line in a form that vegetables and plants like. Now this floored me. So back in the early, this guy had a book, right? And it was the early days of Amazon.com. And so I ordered his Amazon book, and I think it was it was more like a pamphlet, really. I think it was probably like 30 pages, but it did have a diagram on how to build a basic aquaponics system. And so I did so. I built it. I found the stuff necessary to make it, that he had a part list there. I went down to a hardware store, got the things that I needed, and lo and behold, I had an aquaponics system. And granted, it didn't go as smoothly as I'm making it sound. I mean, I did go to a reef store to talk to a fish expert to find out what kind of fish I could do this. this kind of thing. That guy thought I was nuts. He said, "Oh, you're crazy. What are you talking about? How are you gonna do that?" I mean, and at the end of the day, we decided on some African cichlids because they kind of are easy to manage. And so I bought a bunch of these African cichlids, brackish water fish, put them in my my fish tank, and a lot of them died. I went back to the guy. I said, "Look, these are the right fish." So he actually ended up coming over to my house in North Carolina to see what the world I was talking about. And we decided that tilapia and possibly smallmouth bass would be the best choice. So we actually went out later to a fishery, a hatchery, and bought some fingerlings of both types of fish, 2 different hatcheries, brought them back, and lo and behold, Eric, it was his name, he became fanatical about aquaponics. He was over at my place checking my system every single day. pH balance, ammonia levels, nitrates and nitrite levels, everything. Well, it wasn't long after that Eric asked me if I would help him construct his aquaponics, and so I did. Now, what was interesting is he didn't ask me until all of a sudden I had lettuce, and I mean out of nowhere. I just planted the seeds, and at the time I was using pea gravel. I just planted the seeds like the guy said in the books. I dropped some seeds in there, make sure the water flows through the flow bed, and in like 2 weeks I had vegetables growing, and he could not believe it. He was stunned. He literally called me at work. I was at work, and he said, "Hey man, you have vegetables in the grow bed. A lot of them." I was like, "Oh, cool." He was over checking on the fish. So then we built his. Well, there was a family that lived across the street from me that had gone through some really, really hard times, and their kids were a little bit older. They were in their teens, and they'd been over kind of messing around over in my backyard. I had a big patch back there, and they started going through some hard times. So Eric and I built them an aquaponics system that they could grow some of their own food. And then the people in the growing club wanted to know how. I took a bunch of my butter crunched lettuce and Oxheart tomatoes, and believe me, those Oxhearts were awesome, to the growing club for people to sample, and they just raved. And they didn't rave because they liked me, because they didn't like me. I was an outsider. But what they did do is they wanted to know how in the world, I was... And I just continued to take that stuff over there, right? And my elderly neighbor to the north of me, I take any of my surplus over to either the growing club or to the neighborhood. And before I knew it, people were interested. So the thing that I didn't know at the time is that other people actually share similar interests. They may not share your exact idea, your exact interest, but if you just open the door of you and say, "Hey, look, I'm interested in this. Anybody's interested in that?" And yeah, you're going to get called crazy by a lot of people. That's a really good thing. I should make that number 6. Being called crazy is an excellent thing. In fact, I'm going to add that for the next time I do this. So the fourth thing I did not know, was that the law of perpetual motion is not just a law of physics. The law of perpetual motion is a law of life in a lot of cases. And that law, roughly paraphrasing, states something that starts in motion stays in motion until an exact and equal opposite stops it or prevents it from being in motion. Well, in the human sense, that law basically means until you allow somebody to stop you. You allow somebody to be that exact and equal opposite. I didn't know that. And I found out some pretty hard lessons about that in relationships. I found out some very hard lessons about it in business. And I found some really great lessons about it regarding following things that I'm passionate about, that I get excited about. Because once you start taking the first step, and then the next step, and then the next step, unless you yourself stop, you make the active decision to stop, you're not going to stop. And and this goes for good things and bad things. It's the law of perpetual motion. Unless you're stopping yourself, you need something equal and opposite to stop that motion. Very valuable lesson that I did not know. I didn't understand that it really did apply to life, not just physics and science. but the social and human side of life. Now, the fifth thing that I didn't know that I did not know is that now is the new then. And what I mean by that is taking an action now and doing something becomes an index of reference for you. It becomes a then. For instance, I remember the first tomato, and I can vividly remember it, by the way. The first Russian Oxheart tomato, I never even had one of those. I didn't even know what they were. I just ordered a seed out of that catalog. A Russian Oxheart tomato out of my aquaponics, and I mean it was probably a softball-sized tomato, nice and red and shaped like an ox's heart. That's why they call it that. Real firm, crisp-tasting tomato. And I remember that consumption of that tomato like you wouldn't believe. It's a new then. It's a referential index. And associated to that Oxheart tomato are all the steps previously in order to eat that fruit that were taken. Everything from constructing the aquaponics to trying a different seed to trying it in the to working on it in the soil that didn't really take off as well as I wanted it to transplanting it into the aquaponics, to watching it flourish, to consuming it, and then to telling other people about it, just like I am telling you right now. This is a new then. A lot of times people will spend a gracious amount of energy and mind share and time planning for things. And people will plan and plan and plan and plan. They'll analyze, they'll go into analysis. And what happens is they spend all of that energy in those two modes. And not to say they're not important modes, but they spend all their energy in those two modes and they don't get to an actual committed action, which is doing it. Going out and doing it. Go and, get the terracotta pot, throw 7 pepper seeds in there, water it, henpeck it, treat it like a bunch of baby chicks, incubate it, do whatever, give your good energy to it, and then experience what it is in that now and add that to your referential index. It's probably one of the most valuable things that I learned that I didn't know. I did not know that planning for and I was in a job and a career at the time that required a great deal of very meticulous plotting and planning and things of that nature. When I started making the decisions that I was going to take action, right, regardless of if I was absolutely perfectly prepared to do that action, right? I discovered that, perfect, isn't really necessary. Good, okay. I think Joel Salatin, a hero of mine, had a quote in his book, something to the extent of, good enough is perfect. It's good enough. Let's get it done. Let's observe and watch and see what happens. And most times you'll find that, as Mr. Salatin says, good enough is perfect. So those are the 5 things that I didn't know, that I did not know. I'm Aaron Anderson, and thanks for listening.